So my involvement started when we moved. My dad was in the Navy and we moved to Canberra in 1973, and I'd played all rugby league up until then. My dad was a firm believer in that Sunday was baked dinner day and rugby league was only played on a Sunday in Canberra, so therefore I began playing rugby union. I ended up at Marist Brothers College in Pearce in Canberra, played first 15 there in year 9 and 10, and then left school and I began an apprenticeship as a carpenter. I did that for 12 months, and then the summer of the beginning of 1977, a very close friend of mine actually mentioned an Australian Schoolboys tour that was going to the UK at the end of 1977. And I was very interested in that, and then began the process of convincing my mum and dad to let me go back to school, of all things. In the end, I convinced my dad that I wanted to join the AFP, and he allowed me to go back and complete year 11 and 12 at Marist Brothers in Canberra. In 1977, I played rugby union, of course, for the school, and I also played it for my local club, Royals in Canberra. The school nationals came around. I was selected for the ACT in what we thought was a very strong side. We went to the nationals at 2G Milnerfield, and I think we finished 4th. The competition, as you could well imagine, and unbeknownst to us, was fierce. For all positions across the field, there are a great number of great rugby players on display at that tournament that all had one purpose, and that was to make this tour to go to the UK. Very fierce. The ACT wasn't successful. We finished, I think, 4th or 5th on the ladder, with the big guns, New South Wales 1 and 2, playing each other in the final, I think it was, with Queensland finishing 3rd. From there, I was fortunate enough with a couple of other Canberra ACT players to make the trials to be played at the University of New South Wales. And it's quite funny, I always say that I turned up at those trials that day and I had a pretty good inkling of who my competition was to make the tour. Number 1 was Chris Roach. This was going to be his 3rd selection of the Australian Schoolboys. So obviously, and a great player, obviously he was the standout, and probably the first back row that was going to be picked. I was very fortunate enough at the trials to be selected in the same team as Roachy. The format for the trials was, I think we had 3 teams playing each other. I was in Roachy's team and I just chased him like a cattle dog all day, with the feeling that if he was going to make it with the way he performed, if I could tag on the back of that, then I'd have a very good chance of making the tour. I did that and was very fortunate enough to actually be named in the squad for the UK. It was a very, very hard day's rugby that day. There were a lot of great players on display. We were notified, we had the Sydney Morning Herald, we were told on the Monday morning, was how we had to recognise whether we'd been selected or not. And it's quite a funny story. Tony Mitchell, a good mate of mine from the ACT, was also in that trial. And we travelled up on plane from Canberra to Sydney for the trials. And we'd actually met a couple of nurses from Westmead Hospital the week before. And we stayed with them over the Saturday, the Friday and the Saturday night while the trials were on. And on the Monday morning, we knew we had to get the Sydney Morning Herald to the announcement for the squad. And neither of us really wanted to go up to the news agency and get the paper. We just didn't want to do it. So one of the young nurses went up and got the paper, and I was very fortunate to make the squad, and Tony missed out, which was a very sobering experience flying home with him on the plane. Me making it and him missing out. He was a tremendous player. So we went back to Canberra. Of course, Mum and Dad were over the moon about it. Received a lot of support from my local club and the school about the announcement, and that was fantastic. We then had to, over the next weeks, we were given training programs. We had to do medicals for the tour as a prerequisite to go onto the tour to begin the camp before we left Australia. The fitness program was pretty strong. Like, I trained very hard over that next couple of months before the tour left Australia. To make sure that and was very fortunate. Myself and Michael O'Connor had also made the squad. We played in the local Royals team together, and we had more or less our own one of our senior players at the Royals Club trained us over the next couple of months just to ensure that we were right for the tour. Going into camp at Waverley, another eye-opener. I was pretty naive in that I had no real understanding about what this tour was going to undertake. I played in the Australian 17s earlier that year on a tour to New Zealand, but in no comparison to what was about to occur with this side. Once again, the first day at the dormitories at Waverley, getting to meet all the other players personally, working out who, from a competitive point of view, who was your opposition, who you were going to have to beat to make the test squad, be the #1 selected player. That it began very early. Competition was very fierce. The trial at Waverley was not my best. I rolled my ankle, so I was probably 5 minutes into the trial. So I was out for a couple of weeks. So I then began in a supportive role as well as trying to get myself right. So I missed out. Our first game was in Japan. I missed out on the game in Japan, and then we went to England and then on to France. I remember Dad telling me that if I was fortunate enough to make the tour, he was going to take Mum on. There was some supporters crew that were going as well, and he was very keen to take my mum along on that tour. That never eventuated for one reason or another, but it was just the relief and the excitement. Like, I'd never really, apart from New Zealand, I was very naive on what was out there in the world, and this was going to be an experience that you'd never forget. 2 months overseas was just something that just didn't come along. It was just a fantastic feeling to know that. But at the same time, as I said before, I was with Tony Mitchell, and his disappointment. So I had the two conflicting emotions on the trip home to Canberra. But once I got home, Tony went his way. I went back to my family, and of course there was all the congratulations and the hoo-ah that went with that. Then we had to start raising money as well. A lot of people don't realise we had to sell raffle tickets to help us fund the tour, as far as our personal effects and all the rest of it. So we had support from the school, the clubs, and that just to help us get up and going in the first place.
You made a decision. You wanted to make that tour. You'd already left school. I mean, that's a personal decision. It's a goal you made. Can you go back to that sort of period and why you did that? Why was it important?
I think rugby was a love. I remember my first game of rugby after playing rugby league. That rugby was a sport that I truly loved. The opportunity to travel was fantastic. I suppose I had a little bit of an ego. I thought I was probably better than what I was. But I've always loved having a goal and being determined to achieve and reach that goal in my own way. So obviously, the closer we got to the school's championships at TG Milner, and then turning up there and realising how hot the opposition was a totally new focus. I'd come out of a very small rugby community in Canberra. We had some great players, especially in my age groups when I came through the junior representative teams. But once we turned up at TG Milner, just to go up against that opposition and to play that type of opposition, and to come away winners, to come away with the selection was fantastic. ACT, the side that I was involved in the year before, had won the Nationals at under 16 level. That had never been achieved by an ACT team ever. So we had an inkling that we had some good players, and we were fairly good ourselves individually. But the realisation when you went into the competition, the Nationals the following year at TG Miller, and the type of players we were up against coming out of the Brisbane schools competition. And of course we had the three Ella boys running around, and George, Gavalis, and they were just superstars at that level all over the paddock. Then to front up to the trial and get through the trial and finally be selected. That was So that was just, it was just a feeling of satisfaction, personal satisfaction, that the hard work we'd put into it, and to achieve that goal was something unreal. It was surreal. The players have missed out right across the board, and a lot of people, we discuss this as a squad continually whenever we have reunions. Some of the players that didn't make this squad, and their talents and what they did after those years as schoolboys, just reflects on how strong our squad was. If you have a look at the players that didn't make it, Michael O'Connor, for example, wasn't selected in the original trial squads. And I remember Peter, his dad, had to drive down to the South Coast because Michael was down there surfing, to get Michael, bring him back to Canberra so we could go to Sydney for the trial. How different would have that been if Michael O'Connor hadn't made that side, that schoolboy side, for that tour? Just one of those circumstances, the way things work out. Watching players after that, like Lloyd Walker from the Metroville and Randwick Club, fantastic player. Jeff Mould's son, Grant, fantastic player. And that was right across the board. There were players representing their state in their schoolboys teams that were just absolutely tremendous players. And I would not have liked to have been on the selection committee that picked the final 28 for us to go to the UK. The tour itself was, as I said before, was a steep learning curve. I think first of all, the thing that stands out to me was just the camaraderie and of being a big family, of having 31 males for 2 months away from Australia, travelling overseas, when not many of us had ever been before. But the beginning, even in camp at Waverley, the first time we all met up, there was just a feeling that this was just going to be a tremendous bunch of guys. Led by management, which were fantastic. Brother Bob Wallace was absolute. Jim Lucy's camaraderie, the father figures, Jeff Mould with his strictness, and he was a strict coach. So we had our trial in Sydney. I hurt my ankle, then we went to Japan. I didn't play in that game, but for a young bloke, even in Japan, not knowing anything about Japan and just walking in the streets with players and just experiencing. We were only there for a couple of nights, but just experiencing what Tokyo was all about and the cultures, and that was fantastic. On the way from Tokyo through to our first stop at London, we stopped at Moscow in transit, and just looking out the plane at the Siberian snow flats, and that was just the plains, and that was just something incredible that you just don't experience. You couldn't experience that as a kid coming from Canberra. So we got to London, then we ended up in Paris. The game was called off, which was unfortunate, but we had a ball. We did all the touristy things in Paris. Once again, a lot of cultural experience, and I'm not one that was ever into culture or history or anything like that, but it dawned pretty quickly that the places we were and where we were going, there was going to be some life experiences there that you'd never forget, and that the history part of it, the age of it, looking at being in cities that are 1,000 years or hundreds of years old, coming from a country that was 200-year old, was just fantastic. Across the ferry again, the ferries were quite interesting. We'd met up with Roy, our bus driver, our coach driver, that was going to look after us for 2 months. He was a fantastic guy. He became another father figure. He became part of the family as much as anyone else on the tour. Roy was with us for that whole 2 months. The games, I think our first game we played was at the Wasp ground in London. It was my first game back. I don't think I was ready to play, but time was running out, so with a very heavily strapped ankle, I managed to get through that game. I thought I played very well. I think we were all becoming moulded by Jeff Mould, for want of a better word. Jeff had a formula for the way he wanted the game to be played. He was strict. You had to abide by that formula. And as a back rower, the one thing we had to do was be the fittest people on the field. We can talk about the brilliance of our back line, the amount of tries they scored and how fantastic they were. But if we didn't have that link between the forwards and the backs, which was the back row, then the whole thing would have come crumbling down. Not so much with Jeff, but I think with Chris and especially Ian Miller and Glenn Bailey and myself and Andrew McLean, who were the back rowers on the tour, we formulated ourselves the best way to fit into Jeff's mould, our speed, what we could do at the breakdown, who had to be there first, who were the running and supporting roles and all that type of stuff. It was in those early games, and I think it stretched probably to 3/4 of the way through the tour, it became obvious that we were going to do it very hard in the forwards. At that time in the UK, it was a very forward-based 10-man rugby game, and we came up against some very strong forward packs. We'd come up with the solution that the feeling was within the forward structure that we probably only needed 30% of the ball with our brilliant backs to win any game. So that's what we set our sights at. A minimum of 30%. Any ball we got, any percentage we got over that, as in winning the opposition ball or winning our own set piece, was going to guarantee us a win. And that was a formula that lasted us for the whole tour, and was very, very much a big part of the success of the tour. With my injury, I survived that game, and I was right for the rest of the tour. But it became became quite obvious early on who the starters were going to be for the test matches. That was not an easy pill to swallow. I wasn't part of that. But the test forward pack was a very strong and deserving forward pack for their selection. And there was no ill feelings. And this is a big part of why this tour was a success. We all worked for each other. It didn't matter where we called ourselves the dirt trackers. We were the midweek players. And I believe, and the other dirt trackers with me believe, we played the tougher rugby. The test matches were not easy games, but I felt that on any tour, and it's the same as if you have the All Blacks come to Australia or the Wallabies used to go on their great Northern tours and that like that, that the teams we came up, the school representative teams we came up in that against week in, week out, midweek, had been together longer than their test sides. They'd had time to structure themselves, and the more successful we became, the more we were, for want of a better word, put on the headhunting list. Who was going to knock us off first? Who was going to stop this continuous, exciting rugby that was successful, that was try scoring, that was, and the places we went, the supporters and our opposition were in awe of the way we played. So early on, it was apparent that the test side was put in place. There was a couple of changes in that, but we moved on with that, and we began to run ourselves not as a separate unit, but as the dirt trackers that had to fight to win our games, to make this tour successful. To be successful with the test boys, the blokes who were playing the tests, the dirt trackers had to do the hard work week in, week out during the week. And this was evident in some of the games we played. I remember a game we played Pontypool in Wales. Midweek, nearly snow, sleet, cold, in 3 or 4 inches of mud. One of the worst nights one of the worst conditions I've ever played rugby in. And we came up against this forward pack that were just brutal, absolutely brutal. And we hung in there. We fought, we dogged it out in the trenches. It wasn't a great game for the backs because people say you can't run the ball in those conditions. But we didn't alter our attack whatsoever. We still absolutely tried to run the ball, and it was a fantastic night. We didn't win by much, but we proved that you could run the ball in the mud. And to ourselves, we proved as a forward pack that we could stand up against, and this was I think, up until then, the best forward pack we come up against. And it was a great win. It was a great win. So we finished at Pontypool, and I think the test was the next game we played in Wales, which was fantastic. Cardiff Arms Park. I remember as a teenager listening, and the Welsh were in those 70s were one of the world leaders in rugby, and just to turn up there and be part of it. I think the crowd was 15,000 to 18,000, which was tremendous. And by this stage, the press had jumped on board with us. The Scrolls, the writers from the UK, were fascinated with the way Jeff Mould wanted to coach and play the game. and how we supported him in that role. So the test match came and went. It was a great win. It was a great win. It was fantastic. All the experience of Cardiff Arms Park, and even the backfield. We went and watched Cardiff, their club side, play on the back stadium, which was just a rugby stadium that you wouldn't have even seen in Australia, and that was their number 2 ground. But I'd just like to say, we've then moved to North Wales to a place called Llandudno. Now, up till now, I think solely, apart from a bit of fun and getting on and just schoolboys being larrikins, we hadn't really adapted, or we hadn't really formulated what our personalities were all about as a family, a rugby family. And of course, Llandudno was the first place where we were on tour where we got billeted. And at this stage, homesickness was starting to set in. It was something different. We were all experiencing different emotions, being away from home and that. And to go into a family environment, to be someone's house and to learn the new cultures and that, and be out of these boarding homes and stuff like that, where we'd been staying in hostels and stuff like that, was fantastic. And we played a game up there which we won quite convincingly, but the local schools took us on board, and we really started to build that family identity for what we were. We were out in the streets, we were mingling, we were sightseeing, we were doing all that with the families we were billeted with, but we were also getting together. We didn't want to be apart from each other. We just wanted to come together and be together, but doing that in a little tiny village in northern Wales was fantastic. We moved on then to Northern Ireland, which was an eye-opener in those days. There was still the problems between the British and the Irish in Northern Ireland. To experience what was going on there was, and to have security guards looking after us and that type of stuff was something that we would never have expected. To see troops with machine guns in the streets hiding behind 44-gallon concrete drums and stuff like that was just an eye-opener. We never thought you would never expect to experience that. We played a great game there. It was a tough game again. The test match was going to be the following week down in Dublin, but in Northern Ireland we played a very tough local representative school side there. Got away off the win. I think they might have been leading at half time, and we came back and won that game. But the Irish were fantastic. I remember we were driving from Northern Ireland down to Dublin, or on our way to Dublin, just out in the back blocks. And Ireland was in 1977. It didn't have a highway in the country. They were like country lanes, and we were in the country. We come around this corner, and there was a sign up. It was such and such rugby club. We thought, so Roy, the great man that he was, the coach driver, pulled up the bus, did a U-turn, did a 20-point U-turn to come back. We pulled into this little, like a clubhouse and grounds there to stretch our legs. We thought we'd just have a game of touch, stretch the legs, stuff like that. And one of the local Cockneys farmers was there, and he was part of the rugby club, and he found out who we were. They all of a sudden opened up the club, opened up the bar. We had all these local farmers coming in, and it was just fantastic. It was tremendous. The Irish loved us. We had some great times. They organised some. I remember we had some great school dances we went to. The Irish test, once again, was a very tough game that we got away with. But we left Ireland very happy, very content, and very, with the hospitality that the Irish had shown us. It was fantastic. But that was all about to change on a silly ferry ride from I think it was Dublin to southern Wales in a 4-6 gale. 90% of the trip, the tourists, our tourists were obviously very seasick, and I've never seen seas like it. 4-6 gale in the Irish Seas is not somewhere where you want to be, but we all survived it. We got into Wales, and then that became the back end of the tour. Travelling through the Midlands and playing games through there as well, leading up to, of course, the tests, the famous fog test at Twickenham. Before then, we'd played some games. I remember we played at the dirt track, as I call them. We had a game against, I think it was Seven Oaks, who ran out an under 20s to 23 side against us instead of an under 18 side. One of the toughest games of football I ever played in. Once again, we were dominated in the forwards. We worked our rings off. We hung in there, and we had a glorious back line that could run the tries in. And then we were leading down to the test match. And even though upset not to make it the test lineup or the starting or the 21 in the squad in those days, it was just all hands on deck. We had one purpose, one goal to go. This was the climax of it all, was Twickenham. And it was unfortunate the fog came in that night. For what we saw of it being on the sideline in the stands, and that it was a great game, and the players themselves said that there was no way England was ever going to beat us. There was no way England were ever going to beat us that night. And the success and the fun we had after that and leading up to that, and I remember the competition within the squad was fantastic. We would stop at a little. I remember on the coast. It wasn't around Dover. It was up the coast there somewhere, and we're just staying in this. And you see them on television. Like a country pub, hotel, motel type of complex, but it was winter, so there was no one in there. It was cold and it was blizzardy and that. And we're stuck in these pub accommodation, and there'd be a table tennis, a ping pong table there, and all of a sudden the boys would be into it. Or there was a pool table, or there was a darts board. It didn't matter what was around. The squad got into it, and they were competitive. We played some cards, not great cards, but those things where we were stuck in places together. Like it's in Athens. It's in Athens, I think it was, in Wales on Christmas Eve. We're stuck on the Air Force Base in a blizzard. They couldn't get in to get out to get the supplies of food to feed us and that. And we were stuck on this place. We had to entertain ourselves. We had to formulate basketball teams and play and be competitive against each other. We had to do all these things. Entertain ourselves, and by doing that we just became closer and closer and closer. They call it these days mental health. We had issues. We didn't have issues with that, but it was there. It was part of it. But I think in 1977 we worked very hard together to make sure that people were happy in what they were doing. It was very easy to tell, and everyone experienced a little bit of homesick, a bit of bit of emotional downfall and stuff like that, and we managed to pick ourselves up and help each other out of those sort of, those troughs. And that's a credit to Bob Wallace and a credit to Jim Lucy as well, because they were well on top of that. Being school teachers, and I think great school teachers, they understood young men and what they needed, what they wanted, what they were capable of, the mischief we could get up to, and they were very good in breaking that up before it ever occurred and became an issue, which is is a great credit to those two men, and how they ran this tour and how they looked after this family of footballers, young men that were on the UK, away from home for 2 months. It was fantastic. So back to the football side of it, we went to The Hague in Holland, crossed on another ferry ride, which was fantastic. Got billeted in Holland at The Hague. I had a fantastic family, and even Holland, it was a very modern city, The Hague, in 1977. Well, this would have been after Christmas. It would have been 78. Great family bullet. The English wasn't spoken in the family. We had to adapt to that. As a bunch, we roamed the streets of The Hague doing all the sightseeing stuff and got up to a bit of mischief, but that's what's on tour stays on tour. And then back on the ferry, more or less our last trip back to Heathrow to fly out to Australia. And that was a fantastic ferry ride back to wherever we ended up, going back to the UK. We knew it was coming to an end. We'd probably never experienced the sights, the rugby, the history that we'd all experienced in those 2 months. And that ferry ride back to the UK was a great trip. I think Bob let us have a beer or two on the way, and there was a great patronage on the ferry that became very excited and took us on to look after us on the ferry, and it was like a party for the 12 hours or whatever it was we were on this ferry. It was fantastic. And then all of course coming home, and so of course coming home to Australia, I think my mum had sent me over some press clippings from the early on part of the tour, but we had no idea what was going on in Australia with the press, especially the three brothers, who were fantastic, and for a journalist to, for the rugby sports writers to be fascinated with what we did on the field was great. For them to be fascinated and then have the general press come on board with the three brothers Ella was also fantastic. At that stage, I think not just schoolboy rugby, but rugby in Australia was played and loved by the blokes that played it. It wasn't great. It wasn't anywhere near. It had nowhere near the profile it has these days. I think we had a massive contribution to rugby union from that tour. Getting back to Canberra, even the local Canberra Times, their local writer Ian Foster was just fascinated with what had happened on this tour, and all you want to do is write about it, and that was fantastic. Then going back to school and doing school assemblies and explaining to all your mates and what happened in that. And then a lot of people forget we played two exhibition matches when we got back to Australia. One at Ballymore against the Queensland Presidents 15. So I think the exhibition games, one in Brisbane and one in Sydney, the Brisbane one was our first get together after we got back. So we'd gotten back and gone all home and that, and then the management had agreed, Australian schools had agreed to these two exhibition matches, which is fair enough. People had read about us and wanted to watch us. So we turned up at Ballymore. It was like our first reunion really. We've had plenty since then. But what they didn't understand was that these teams were made of all the great and very good players that didn't actually make this team out of Sydney and Brisbane and the ACT. And it was on for young and old. We had to perform. We wanted to perform and play the style of rugby, the running game that we were renowned for, under any conditions. And these were what I would call fierce battles. It would have been nothing better, I would imagine, than one of these Queensland Presidents team or the Sydney Presidents team or whatever they call themselves, to knock us off after coming home undefeated. So we won in Brisbane. That was great. And I think the next week we went down to Sydney. We played at the old sports ground at Sydney, and that was on for young and old. It was not a brutal game. It wasn't a nasty game, but it was a very, very tough game. And we opened it up. That was probably, I remember playing that game, and we scored, I think, 2 or 3 80-metre tries. Jeff was overwhelmed. We'd finally, on home soil, come back with this style of play, and we executed it the way he wanted it to be executed in our final game together as players. We had some good opposition. I remember Eddie Jones played in the opposition that day. Very tough teammate of mine from Canberra, Jeff Didier. But we stuck to our guns, we stuck to the plan, we played the 15-man game the way Jeff wanted us to play. And with the talent we had on display, I don't think we were ever going to be beaten. And that was a great a climax to what we'd achieved over the previous 2 or 3 months. And it was a great way to wrap up the squad on the football field. We've had a lot of great times together with reunions in that sense, and we're still the family that we are today. The camaraderie is fantastic, but that last game at the football stadium where we did perform was just a culmination of 2 months of pretty hard work, a lot of fun, great experiences, and a family that will always be together.
Looking back at it now, what did making this team mean to you in your life?
A love of rugby. I've since gone on to coach. Over 30 years I've professionally coached here and overseas. An understanding of the game, which I think, to play the game the way Jeff Mould wanted us to play the game is the most naturalist form of the game. I think that's why it's called. That's why Webb Ellis picked up the ball and ran with it. So that was a big part of it. But above all, it's the friendships, the family that we have here, and not only the inner family, which is the players and the squad members, but the wives, the girlfriends, the kids, the grandkids, and we discuss all that every time we get together. With every passing reunion or the expectation of going to a reunion of the 1977 Schoolboys, you become excited. There's no egos. We're all one. We're all equal. It doesn't matter where we stand in this squad. We're all part of a great unity that performed at the highest level and to the best of our ability, and come away as winners. And I took that through my football career, my coaching career, as far as excellence goes. And you need that to be successful. And the understanding that there's no set way to play this game. You need to have in the back of your mind the idea that it can be played one way, and that's fantastic. And what we did with Jeff was fantastic, but it can be played 100 different ways as well. And that's what I got out of the tour. Continually, every 2 or 3 years when we have these reunions and we rehash and we go over all our great adventures, we still bring up things that people have forgotten. This weekend, with this reunion at Noosa Heads, we're still recalling things. Oh, that happened. That's right. That has, and that's all part of it. That's the great thing about this group and the mateship that we've had within this squad of 31 players and officials. It's been fantastic. I think Schoolboys Rugby, if you have a look on the world cycle, if you have a look, I'll just give you an example. The United States has their now professional league, which is going gangbusters. It's becoming popular, but their national team still cannot compete on the they can't. They get beaten by Wales. They got beaten by Panama or wherever it was not to make the World Cup. The simple reason behind that is you cannot develop at the top end. You've got to develop at the bottom and the mid sections of this sport to be truly competitive at the top end with all the things it takes to be a winner at the test level or international level. You have to have that development, this acquisition of skills, the mindset, the patience. We have two structures where we get that from. We get it through our junior structures and our schoolboy structures. And the juniors are fantastic in what they do, but the schoolboys gives us a level of excellence at a national level that can't be mirrored by the junior structure. The things that come out of schoolboy football, for example, whether it be GPS, CHS, it doesn't matter. Playing in front of your 500 supporters or 5,000 supporters or whatever, being part of that all, and the traditions of rugby that are introduced to schoolboy rugby, live with those players all the way through, and that's then becomes the success. That becomes the success of your national team.
Is there anything else you want to cover?
I just think I don't know whether the boys have said this, but just a big thank you to our parents. Not necessarily for all the work they did with us, like travelling to grounds and stuff like that, but I think it's very hard for any athlete, let alone to be involved in a group like this without the support of great parents. And I've met most of the parents of the boys here involved now, and they're all fantastic. And there was a commonality about them all, in that egos weren't part of it. Egos weren't part of it. There was no one better than anyone else. We were all on an equal playing field. We all had the same role, the same jobs, the same attitude, the same patience to play this game the way we played it. And that, I think, that personalities that each of the squad members had came from those parents. And I think that's a big part that isn't necessarily recognised. And then you talk about the manners, table manners, being able to meet the Queen, for example, or dignitaries, or sit at a dinner with high-knobbing pommies, at formal dinners continually all around the country, and to have the patience and, you know, the nicety to be able to do that and walk out of those rooms and that and have people talk about how well mannered we were was a great part of it as well, of the tour, and in public as well. Yeah, it was fantastic, and I think the parents don't get enough recognition for what their involvement was with this squad, and how they brought these young men up to perform and to be well mannered and to, you know, behave within society or whatever you'd like to call it.